The rain had already darkened the gravel by the time Lena Hart arrived at Halston Manor, turning the long drive into a silver ribbon that curved through clipped hedges toward a house too large to feel accidental. She stepped out of the taxi with one suitcase, one garment bag, and the calm expression she always used when panic would be too expensive. Folded inside her purse were the newest invoices for her younger sister's treatment. The agency fee for this 5-day assignment would buy another month of medicine, another month of tests, another month of pretending everything was still manageable. A black sedan waited beneath the entrance arch. Beside it stood a man in a dark overcoat, one gloved hand resting on the rear door as if even the weather had been instructed to behave around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and composed in a way that made everyone else seem unfinished. Dark hair. Pale eyes. A face too controlled to be called kind, though far too striking to ignore. He looked first at his watch, then at her. "You are late." Lena paid the driver and lifted her suitcase without asking for help. "By 40 seconds. In most places that still counts as arriving. That explains the gates." "I was hired to drive Mrs. Vivian Halston," she said. "Not stand in the rain while a stranger rehearses contempt." "You were hired to be useful," he replied. His mouth almost moved. "No." The answer came so quickly she nearly smiled. He opened the rear door of the sedan. "Get in." Lena glanced toward the front entrance, which was only a few steps away. "That seems dramatic. The stones are slippery. So are men who give orders before introductions." A brief flicker crossed his expression. Not amusement exactly. Surprise, perhaps, that resistance had arrived in a navy coat and sensible shoes. She got in because she was wet, tired, and determined not to lose an excellent contract over one arrogant man with perfect posture. The interior smelled of cedar, leather, and old money that no longer needed to announce itself. He closed the door, walked around the car, and took the driver's seat. That made her pause. The car crossed an inner courtyard and stopped beneath a side entrance. Before Lena could reach for the handle, he was already outside opening her door. Up close, he looked even less like staff. Not because of his coat or watch, but because everyone they passed reacted to him without waiting for instruction. A footman stepped aside. 2 maids nodded to him first. "Interesting. This way," he said. "You use a remarkable number of words. You use too many. Only when the company earns it." He led her through an entrance hall of marble floors, warm light, and portraits large enough to suggest the family liked its dead impressive. The house smelled faintly of roses, polished wood, and carefully managed heat. Lena kept pace beside him without staring. All was expensive. Competence paid better. He opened the doors to a sunroom where a fire burned under a carved mantel and an older woman sat near the window in cream silk and emerald earrings. Her silver hair was swept back from a face sharpened by age rather than softened by it. She held a cane in one hand, though she looked far more likely to use it as a weapon than support. "So," the woman said, studying Lena with bright, quick intelligence, "you are the driver my agency described as excellent under pressure and occasionally insubordinate." Lena set down her suitcase. "I prefer selectively cooperative." For a heartbeat, silence held. Then the woman laughed, rich and delighted. "Wonderful. At last, a woman in this house with a spine." Her gaze shifted toward the man beside Lena. "And there is that face again. Darling, if you glare any harder, the orchids will resign." "I am not glaring," he said. "You have been glaring since adolescence." The woman extended a hand. "Vivian Halston. Lena Hart. Sit, Miss Hart. We have 4 days before the Remington Gala, 1 terrible speech, 3 scheduling disasters, and a household crowded with men who mistake control for character." Lena sat opposite her. The man remained by the mantel, hands loosely clasped behind his back, silent as dark architecture. Vivian outlined the week with clipped efficiency. A dress fitting in Knightsbridge. A donor lunch at Claridge's. A reception on Thursday. The gala on Saturday evening, with cameras, donors, and enough ego in one ballroom to power the city for a week. Lena listened, memorized, and answered crisply. Across the room, she could feel the stranger's attention on her like a hand between her shoulders. Finally Vivian leaned back. There is one more task. You will also do your best to keep my grandson from reorganizing my week according to his latest crisis. Lena glanced toward the man at the mantel. Your driver seems outside my authority. Vivian's smile sharpened. My dear, he is not the driver. The room shifted by a fraction. Lena turned fully toward him. He met her gaze at last, cool and unreadable, with that same dangerous flicker she had seen in the rain. Vivian folded her hands over the head of her cane. Allow me to introduce Rowan Halston. Owner of this house. Chief Executive of Halston Automotive. Reluctant heir to more money than is good for any one man. And, for reasons that entertain him, the person who has just spent 10 minutes pretending to be your chauffeur. She stood before caution could catch her. Then perhaps, she said, voice level, Mr. Halston should learn that deceiving employees is not the same thing as leadership. Vivian's brows lifted. Rowan's expression changed, only slightly, but enough for Lena to see surprise break the surface. Instead of backing down, she lifted her chin and added, if the gala is full of men like you, Mrs. Halston, I'm going to need better shoes. Vivian dismissed the tension with the pleased serenity of a woman who considered other people's discomfort a form of evening entertainment. She rang a small brass bell, summoned tea as if humiliation were best served with porcelain, and began speaking to Lena about schedules, donors, and seating charts with effortless precision, as though the revelation she had just detonated in the middle of the room were nothing more than a conversational garnish. Rowan Halston, meanwhile, said almost nothing. That should have made things easier. Instead it made everything worse. Silence suited him too well. It turned every glance into a judgment and every pause into a challenge. Lena sat opposite Vivian, notebook open, writing down addresses, arrival times, and names of people important enough to be offended by the wrong floral arrangement. Yet all the while she could feel Rowan's presence by the mantel like a shadow cast by something tall and immovable. When the meeting finally ended, Vivian handed Lena a slim leather folder containing the week's itinerary. Your room is in the East Wing, she said. Unpack, have lunch, and be ready by 1. I have a fitting, a lunch, and an opinion to deliver to a committee of men who deserve it. Lena rose. Yes, Mrs. Halston. Vivian, the older woman corrected. Lena hesitated. You hired me this morning. And I liked you within 5 minutes. I move quickly. Vivian's eyes gleamed. No, darling. You will show her upstairs. For the first time since his introduction, genuine resistance crossed his face. Grandmother. Consider it character building. Lena took her suitcase handle. I'm perfectly capable of finding a staircase. Vivian smiled with wicked satisfaction. Of course you are. That is precisely why I want him inconvenienced. They crossed the entrance hall in silence. He walked half a step ahead of her, every line of his body projecting control, discipline, and a distinct unwillingness to be in this exact situation. Lena kept pace beside him, suitcase wheels clicking softly over the polished floor. At the foot of the staircase he spoke without looking at her. You have a habit of speaking before you think. Lena rested one hand on the banister. No. I have a habit of saying what I think before wealthy men convince themselves I shouldn't. His gaze slid toward hers. You assume too much. You pretended to be a chauffeur for sport. I'd say my assumptions are doing reasonable work. He exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite impatience. It was not for sport. Then what was it for? To see whether you would panic. Lena stared. That is somehow worse. They climbed the staircase together beneath a portrait gallery filled with severe ancestors in silk and military jackets. The house grew quieter on the second floor, the hush of the upper corridors carrying the kind of expensive insulation that made the outside world feel theoretical. "My grandmother has had 4 drivers in 6 weeks, Rowan said. One lied to her. One sold information to tabloids. One thought kindness and condescension were the same thing. One simply failed. So your solution was theatrical deception? My solution was efficiency." She stopped walking. "You humiliated me before I'd even crossed the threshold." Rowan stopped too, turning toward her in the wide corridor. Up close, with no matriarch present to deflect the force of him, he seemed even more controlled, as if every reaction had to pass through permission before reaching his face. "You were not humiliated," he said. "You were tested." Lena stared at him for a beat and then smiled, slow and mirthless. "Men like you always think those are different things." He resumed walking and stopped outside a door at the far end of the corridor. "This is your room." It was larger than Lena's entire flat. A carved bed stood beneath tall windows overlooking the south lawns. A fireplace gleamed with fresh polish. Pale blue drapes framed the glass. On a table near the sofa sat a vase of white roses and a silver tray with coffee, fruit, and 2 still-warm pastries. Lena set down her suitcase and looked around carefully, refusing to let amazement show. "Your grandmother believes in overdoing first impressions. She believes comfort makes loyalty easier. And do you?" His gaze rested on her face for a fraction too long. "I believe clarity does." She folded her arms. "Then let me be clear. If you ever decide to test me again, do it honestly." Rowan reached into his coat pocket and placed a thin black key card on the table beside the coffee service. "This opens the garage, the east entrance, and the private drive gate. My direct number is on the back. If plans change, you answer when I call." Lena picked up the key card. "You give this to all the temporary staff?" "No." "Why me?" His expression returned to its usual unreadable calm. "Because if my grandmother likes you, the household will orbit you by dinner." That sounds less like confidence and more like surrender. It sounds like experience. He turned toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "The fitting is at 1. Be downstairs by 12:45. My grandmother dislikes waiting. She'll have to form a support group with you." This time the smile came. Small, unwilling, and gone almost before it existed, but unmistakably real. It changed his entire face, not by softening it, but by revealing how much of him was usually held back. Lena felt the shift like a physical thing. Then he was gone. She stood alone in the too elegant room with the black key card in her hand and an unfamiliar pulse of awareness moving under her skin. It annoyed her immediately. Men like Rowan Halston built their power from rooms, silence, and the assumption that everyone else would step into formation around them. Attraction was exactly the sort of mistake she could not afford. The lie lasted exactly 12 minutes. That was how long Rowan managed to remain on the far side of the table, reviewing donor notes with studied calm, before Vivian called down from her suite demanding the latest speech revision and an immediate opinion on whether one particular board member looked more trustworthy in navy or charcoal. Rowan took the pages from Lena, their fingers brushing just enough to make her pulse misbehave, and left the library without comment. She should have been grateful for the interruption. Instead she sat there staring at the dark window, listening to the fire settle in the grate, and feeling the aftershock of almost. Almost touching. Almost trusting. Almost forgetting that attraction to men like Rowan Halston came with a price tag no sane woman could afford. By the time he returned, he was composed again. So was she. "Vivian prefers the second opening," he said, setting the marked pages beside her. "She says the line about legacy makes the donors sound like they are auditioning for sainthood, which apparently is too ambitious even for this crowd." Lena looked over the page. "She's right. You agree with her quickly. I enjoy survival. His mouth shifted faintly. That may be the first strategic decision you've admitted making. She capped her pen. Only because your family keeps trying to confuse strategy with emotional disclosure. He leaned one shoulder against the table, hands in his pockets now, less formal than usual and somehow more dangerous because of it. And what exactly do you think my family wants from you? Vivian wants honesty, which is rare enough in this house to qualify as entertainment. You want control, which I keep refusing to provide. That is not what I want. The answer came too quickly. Lena looked up. Something in his face tightened, as if the truth had stepped too close to the surface and he disliked being seen from that angle. But he did not correct himself. Then what do you want? She asked softly. His gaze held hers for a long second before shifting to the speech between them. Tonight, I want this revised before my grandmother changes her mind and decides to threaten the board with public memory. That sounds effective. It is. I'm merely trying to avoid litigation. The change of subject was deliberate. Lena let him have it, though not without irritation. She returned to the draft, and within minutes they had slid back into work with the same unnerving rhythm as before. He provided names, figures, old grievances disguised as donor history. She turned facts into emotional leverage, tightening the opening, sharpening the central appeal, stripping away anything that sounded like a committee had touched it with disinfected hands. At 9:30, the house had gone so quiet the ticking clock on the mantel seemed theatrical. At 10, Rowan disappeared and returned with 2 cups of coffee and a small plate of shortbread he claimed not to have stolen from Vivian's private pantry. At 10:15, Lena rewrote the closing paragraph and read it aloud. When she finished, silence settled across the room. Rowan set his coffee down very carefully. That will work. Meaning? Meaning, he said, looking at her in a way that made it difficult to remember the last word she'd spoken, that half the room will donate because your language flatters them, and the other half will donate because they are afraid of being outdone. Lena leaned back in her chair. You say that like disapproval. I say it like admiration for efficiency. She should not have liked the sound of that as much as she did. Before she could answer, the library door opened and Celeste walked in without knocking. She wore cashmere the color of winter cream and a smile cultivated over years of assuming access was the same thing as welcome. Her gaze moved from Rowan to the coffee cups to Lena, taking in the late hour, the closed door, and the revised speech pages with terrible accuracy. I didn't realize this was still going on, she said. It is, Rowan replied. Celeste's expression barely changed. Vivian asked me to drop off the revised seating recommendation. She asked you? Lena asked before she could stop herself. Celeste turned her head slowly. I've known this family a very long time. The implication arrived dressed as elegance and landed as a warning. Rowan took the envelope from her without opening it. Thank you. We're almost finished. Celeste did not leave. Instead she looked at the speech pages in Lena's hand. I hope grandmother isn't overburdening the staff. The week must already be quite demanding. There it was again. Staff. A title used less as description than containment. Lena met her gaze steadily. I find competence less tiring than condescension, but everyone has different thresholds. Rowan went very still. Celeste smiled. How spirited. And how predictable, Rowan said coolly. Good night, Celeste. For the briefest instant, Celeste's polished composure cracked. Not enough for anyone to name it. Enough for Lena to see the anger underneath. She left without another word. The silence she left behind felt sharper than the one before. That was unwise, Rowan said at last. Lena gave a small, incredulous laugh. You defended me at lunch. Yes. And now? Now I'm telling you Celeste rarely loses gracefully. I'm not in competition with her. His eyes lifted to hers. That does not mean she agrees. The words sat between them with uncomfortable weight. Lena looked back at the draft because it was safer. Was she ever in love with you? No. That was fast. Celeste is attached to outcomes, not people. And you know the difference? His answer came after a pause. I'm trying to. Something in that nearly undid her. Instead of replying, she stacked the finished pages, aligned the corners, and pushed them toward him. There. Your grandmother now sounds dangerous, generous, and unignorable. Which I assume was always the goal. He did not take the pages immediately. You could do this professionally again, he said. She laughed once, quietly. Professionally doesn't pay in advance. It could. With what time? He said nothing. The fire cracked softly behind him. Somewhere in the corridor, a clock struck the half-hour. Then Rowan picked up the speech, glanced at the closing line one last time, and set it down again. Come with me. Lena frowned. It's after 10. I'm aware. Where? You'll see. Under any sane circumstances, she would have refused. But Halston Manor had spent 2 days rearranging her common sense, and Rowan's voice had shifted into that lower register that made no space for frivolous arguments. So she followed him. He led her through the darkened west corridor, down a back staircase, and out through a side door into the gardens. The air was cold and damp with the memory of rain. Moonlight silvered the gravel paths and laid pale light across the hedges. Somewhere near the eastern wall, water moved quietly in the fountain. Lena folded her arms against the chill. If this is another test, I am resigning. It isn't. He kept walking until they reached a stone terrace overlooking the south lawn. The house stood luminous behind them, all glass and distance and inherited certainty. Ahead, the garden stretched into darkness. My mother used to come out here when the house became too loud, Rowan said. The abruptness of the confession caught her off guard. Your mother. She hated public rooms. Too many negotiations disguised as meals. He rested his hands on the terrace balustrade. She taught me that if you wanted to know what someone feared, you should watch what they mocked. Contempt is usually camouflage. Lena looked at him in profile, at the restraint still marking every line of him even here, even in moonlight. And what do you think I fear? He turned his head. Needing something from people who can withdraw it. The answer went through her like glass. She could have lied. Could have made a joke. Could have turned it aside with the practiced agility that had saved her 100 times before. Instead she said, that's not fear. That's memory. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Rowan stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to change the air. Lena, he said, her name quieter than it had ever been on his mouth, I know I started this badly. You think? A faint breath of laughter touched his mouth and vanished. I know I make everything sound like a negotiation when I'm trying not to say the wrong thing. And what is the wrong thing? His eyes dropped once more to her mouth, then rose. Anything I can't take back. She should have stepped away. Instead she stayed exactly where she was, pulse unsteady, breath shallow, waiting. When he lifted a hand, it was only to brush a rain-caught strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers barely touched her skin. The contact was light enough to deny, intimate enough to change everything. Rowan, she whispered. He leaned in. And this time, when he kissed her, there was nothing accidental in it at all. The kiss was brief only because both of them understood, too late and all at once, how dangerous it would become if it lasted. Rowan stepped back first, breath unsteady though his face was once again infuriatingly controlled. Lena stood motionless on the terrace, one hand pressed against the cold stone balustrade, feeling the imprint of him everywhere and nowhere at once. Neither of them spoke for a long second. Then Rowan said, in the voice of a man trying to reassemble a building after an earthquake, that should not have happened. Lena stared at him. You kissed me. I'm aware. That was not an accident. No. The moonlight sharpened the planes of his face, leaving the truth in too much relief. He looked less like a billionaire than like a man who had spent years denying himself anything he could not control and had just discovered the limits of that strategy. Lena swallowed. So which part should not have happened? The part where you kissed me, or the part where you meant it? His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. She laughed once, quietly, and without humor. Of course. Lena. No, she straightened. Don't do that thing where you say my name like it solves the problem you just created. He looked at her for a beat. You think this is simple? I think you don't allow yourself anything you cannot classify. That is unfair. It is precise. The old defensive coldness flickered across his expression then, not fully formed, but present. It hurt more than she expected. She stepped around him before he could speak again and went back inside. The next morning was worse. Not because he had changed. Because he had not. At breakfast Rowan was exact, courteous, and entirely unreadable. He discussed seating revisions with Vivian, took a call from the Singapore office, reviewed the delivery schedule for the floral installations, and did not once look at Lena for longer than politeness required. The kiss might have been a hallucination staged by moonlight and bad judgment. Vivian noticed immediately. By 10 o'clock she had sent 2 assistants away in tears, dismissed the pastry chef for over-decorating an apricot tart, and finally cornered Lena in the hallway outside the morning room. What did he do? She asked. Lena blinked. Excuse me. My grandson has looked like a man trying to negotiate with his own bloodstream since breakfast. You have looked like a woman considering arson. I am old, not blind. Lena glanced down the corridor to make sure no one was near enough to enjoy this conversation later. Nothing happened. Vivian raised one immaculate eyebrow. How disappointing. Your enthusiasm for disaster is troubling. It is one of my best qualities. Vivian tapped her cane once against the carpet. Did he kiss you? Lena stared at her. Vivian sighed. So he did. And now he is behaving like his father whenever sincerity threatened the family bloodline. Men are exhausting. Lena folded her arms. He regrets it. Does he? He practically issued a statement. Vivian's expression sharpened. No, darling. He panicked. There is a difference, though men invest an extraordinary amount of energy pretending otherwise. Before Lena could answer, a housemaid hurried around the corner carrying a garment ledger and whispered to Vivian that Celeste had arrived early for the donor walkthrough. Vivian's mouth thinned. Perfect, she said. Nothing improves my day like opportunistic blondes before noon. She swept away, leaving Lena standing in the corridor with a fresh pulse of irritation and no place useful to put it. The walkthrough began at 11 in the ballroom where the gala would be held the following night. Florists moved ladders between half-finished arrangements. Electricians tested lighting rigs over the stage. Round tables stood draped in white linen, each marked with donor names and impossible preferences. Vivian positioned herself at the center of the chaos like a queen inspecting troops before war. Lena worked beside the event coordinator, adjusting arrival sequences, checking transport notes, confirming the revised speech copies were printed and placed on the lectern. Rowan moved through the room with crisp efficiency, solving problems before anyone finished describing them. If he noticed Lena, he gave no sign. Celeste, however, noticed everything. She appeared near the stage in pale blue silk and an expression of benevolent usefulness, carrying a folder no one had requested. More than once, Lena caught her watching the distance between herself and Rowan with the focused interest of someone studying a fracture line. The inevitable collision came beside the donor table assignments. I'm told Vivian is allowing staff unusual access this year, Celeste said lightly, as if discussing weather. Lena kept her eyes on the place cards. I'm told gossip survives here better than roses. Celeste's smile held. You should be careful. Houses like this can be very kind until they remember their structure. Lena finally looked at her. And women like you can be very gracious until they're ignored. Something cold flashed through Celeste's face. You misunderstand me. No, Lena said. I think you're furious that he defended someone you consider beneath notice. The silence around them tightened. Then Celeste leaned in just enough to keep the moment private. You are temporary. Whatever attention you think you've earned here, it will end the second the gala does. Lena wanted to tell herself the words missed. They did not. Rowan appeared before she could answer. Is there a problem? Celeste stepped back smoothly. None at all. Miss Hart and I were discussing logistics. We were finishing, Lena said. Rowan's gaze went to her face, then to Celeste's, then back again. For one dangerous second she thought he might ask the wrong question in the wrong tone and make everything worse. Instead he said, Grandmother wants the revised transport list. Lena handed him the folder without touching his fingers. Done. He took it, pausing just slightly. Thank you. It was absurd that two ordinary words could hurt. The rest of the day moved like a machine built for exhaustion. Vivian approved the final speech and declared it the first honest thing anyone had written for her in years. Board members arrived for rehearsal and left chastened. Donors called with impossible dietary requests. One auction item was delayed, another mislabeled, and a society columnist requested confirmation that Rowan Halston would attend alone, which made the air around the communications desk visibly hotter. By evening, Lena's feet ached and her temper had become flammable. She was reviewing the final driver sequence in the garage office when she heard voices outside the half-open door. Celeste first. You cannot seriously mean to keep her close tomorrow night. Then Rowan, lower. This is not your concern. It becomes my concern when the household starts talking. Lena went still. There is nothing to talk about, Rowan said. The words landed like cold water. Celeste made a soft sound. Then sent her back to the agency after the gala. Quietly. Before grandmother turns a temporary inconvenience into a permanent embarrassment. A long pause followed. When Rowan answered, his voice was unreadable. I know how to handle my own house. Lena did not wait to hear more. She stepped silently out the back door of the garage office and into the night, lungs tight, the transport list trembling once in her hand before she crushed the feeling into anger. Of course. Of course a man like Rowan Halston would kiss her under the moon and then discuss how to handle the consequences by daylight. By the time she returned to the main house, her expression was calm again. Only Vivian, watching from the foot of the staircase, seemed to recognize that calm for what it was. A storm choosing where to break. The morning of the gala began before dawn. Lena was awake by 5:30, dressed by 6, and in the east kitchen by 6:15 with a mug of coffee she barely tasted. Outside, the grounds were already alive with delivery vans, florists, lighting crews, and security staff adjusting earpieces in the blue-gray light. Inside, Halston Manor hummed with the organized panic unique to expensive events that claimed to celebrate generosity while threatening to collapse under flower invoices. She should have been thinking only about timing. Instead she kept hearing Rowan's voice outside the garage office. There is nothing to talk about. Each repetition made her colder. By 8, she had 3 route changes, 1 dietary crisis, 2 late floral deliveries, and a headache pressing behind her left eye. Mia texted just after 9. Bad coffee. Worse nurse. Miss you. Lena smiled despite everything and typed back quickly. Survive both. I'll call after midnight. 3 dots appeared. Then another message. You sound tired. Lena stared at the screen for a moment before writing the safest lie she knew. Just busy. Mia's reply came almost immediately. Busy means scared when you say it. Breathe. That almost undid her. She locked the phone, slipped it into her pocket, and returned to work. By mid-morning Vivian had gone to her final fitting, Celeste had made herself visible in every possible room, and Rowan had become even more infuriatingly composed than usual. He gave instructions, signed deliveries, handled press inquiries, and barely spoke to Lena beyond logistics. At noon, Vivian summoned her upstairs. The dressing suite looked like a war between silk and diamonds. Garment bags hung from every wardrobe door. 3 pairs of shoes stood lined up like ceremonial weapons. A jeweler's case sat open on the chaise. Vivian stood in the middle of it all in a robe, half made up, entirely authoritative. "You look murderous," she observed. "Long day," Lena said. "Don't be dull. Sit." Lena obeyed because resistance around Vivian only prolonged the inevitable. The older woman held out a folded sheet of paper. It was the final printed speech, heavily marked in Lena's handwriting. "You did this," Vivian said. "Yes. And it is the best speech I've given in 10 years. Lena looked down. "Thank you." Vivian's gaze sharpened. "You heard something." It was not a question. Lena said nothing. Vivian exhaled. Men remain disappointingly consistent across tax brackets. "Please don't start defending him." "I wasn't planning to defend anyone. I was planning to ask whether you are foolish enough to let one overheard conversation rewrite what you have seen with your own eyes." Lena's jaw tightened. "What I heard was clear." Vivian studied her face for a long moment. "Perhaps. And perhaps he was trying to protect you in the most idiotic possible way, which is very much a Halston talent." Before Lena could answer, a member of the styling team hurried in with an issue involving the emerald necklace clasp, and the moment was lost. The gala began before the guests arrived. Cars lined the drive by 6:30. Security coordinated photographers at the front steps. The ballroom blazed with candlelight and crystal. Waiters moved like clockwork. A string quartet rehearsed near the staircase. Every guest who entered brought perfume, expectation, and the faint scent of performance. Lena drove Vivian and Rowan together from the side entrance to the main front steps because Vivian insisted on making an arrival even though they were already home. The absurdity of it might have amused Lena on any other night. Instead she watched Rowan in the rearview mirror and found him unreadable. Vivian wore black silk, emeralds, and victory. Rowan stood beside her in a midnight tuxedo that made him look less like a man than a verdict delivered beautifully. When he opened Vivian's door, photographers surged. Flash after flash lit the gravel. Then Vivian extended her gloved hand toward Lena. "Walk with us," she said. Lena blinked. "That's not necessary. Neither is half this event. Indulge me." Every instinct she possessed warned her not to step into that light. But saying no to Vivian on gala night was less a choice than a theory. So Lena handed the keys to the backup driver, smoothed her black dress, and stepped up beside them. The cameras caught everything. The 3 of them entering together. Vivian between them like a monarch making selections. Rowan's hand briefly at Lena's back when one reporter moved too close. And Celeste, waiting inside the front hall, seeing all of it with expressionless precision. The ballroom glittered. Names that appeared in business pages and society columns clustered beneath chandeliers, all smiling with professional teeth. Lena moved through the room doing what she had been hired to do, adjusting timing, signaling staff, guiding Vivian from donor to donor, checking that the speech copies were in place. But the cameras had already changed the atmosphere. People looked at her twice now. Some with curiosity. Some with calculation. 1 or 2 with immediate dismissal sharpened by the possibility that they might need to revise it later. By 8, rumors were moving faster than the champagne. A junior trustee asked whether she had worked with Vivian for years. A columnist asked if she was part of the foundation team. One donor's wife looked Lena up and down and said, with impeccable malice, "How modern of Rowan." Lena smiled like a knife and kept walking. Then Mia called. Lena saw the screen light up while standing in the service corridor behind the ballroom, just minutes before Vivian's speech. She answered at once. Mia. Her sister's voice sounded thinner than usual. Hey. Something in Lena's chest tightened. What's wrong? Nothing dramatic. I had a reaction after the new medication. They're keeping me overnight for observation. The corridor seemed to tilt. Why didn't anyone call me sooner? Because I told them you were working and because I'm not 5. Mia. I'm okay, her sister said gently. Seriously. But you should hear this from me before you hear it from a nurse who sounds like she's narrating an apology. Lena pressed one hand to the wall. Which doctor is on? Mia told her. Lena knew the name. Not reassuringly. I'm coming after this, she said. You always were. There was a pause. Then Mia asked, too softly, are you alone? Lena closed her eyes. No. Good, Mia whispered. Stay that way, if you can. The line clicked dead. When Lena turned back toward the ballroom entrance, Rowan was standing there. He had clearly heard enough to understand. What happened, he asked. She should have told him nothing. Instead the truth came out stripped bare by exhaustion. My sister's in hospital. They say it's manageable, which is what people say right before they explain how expensive manageable has become. Something changed in his face. Not pity. Something steadier. Go, he said. She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. And leave your grandmother 5 minutes before the speech? I'll handle the floor. No. I finish what I start. His gaze held hers. Lena. Don't, she said quietly. Don't sound like you're on my side now. The words struck. He absorbed them without flinching, which somehow made it worse. Before either of them could say more, Celeste appeared at the end of the corridor and took in the scene with ruthless accuracy, Lena flushed with strain, Rowan close, the private intensity of a conversation nobody else had been invited to witness. How convenient. She smiled. By the time Vivian reached the lectern, the rumor had evolved from speculation into story. And stories, Lena knew, were most dangerous when told by people who believed status made them true. The first sign of disaster was not dramatic. It was a missing page. Vivian stood at the lectern under the ballroom lights, one hand resting lightly on the polished wood, the room settling around her with donor attention and crystal silence. Lena, stationed near the side entrance to the stage, watched as Vivian glanced down at the printed speech and paused. Once. Twice. Then looked up sharply. Lena knew that look. Something was wrong. She moved at once, crossing behind the curtain while the quartet's final note dissolved into expectation. Rowan, standing near the front tables, saw her expression and was on his feet before she reached the wings. The final page is gone, she whispered. Vivian turned another sheet with elegant fury. Nothing. The last page contained the closing appeal, the strongest part of the speech, the exact passage designed to break open the room and its wallets in one stroke. Who had the copies? Rowan asked. Only staff, Lena said automatically. Then she saw Celeste near the communications table, speaking softly to a columnist while holding a folded sheet of paper she did not bother to hide quickly enough. For one wild second Lena thought of crossing the ballroom and snatching it from her hand in front of everyone. Vivian did something far more terrifying. She stepped away from the lectern and looked directly toward the wings. Lena, she said into the microphone, voice warm and carrying, come here. The ballroom shifted. 200 faces turned. Lena stood frozen for half a heartbeat. Then Rowan was beside her, low voice steady at her ear. Go. She walked into the light with her pulse hammering behind her ribs. The chandeliers seemed too bright. The room too large. Every camera too ready. Vivian held out the remaining pages with a smile so elegant nobody outside the family would recognize the danger in it. Apparently, she said to the room, my household has decided to provide excitement before dessert. The final page of my speech has vanished, which is unfortunate for anyone hoping I would become less honest in its absence. Scattered laughter rippled across the room. Vivian continued, fortunately, the woman who helped rescue this speech also happens to possess a better memory than half my board. So rather than pretend nothing has happened, I am going to ask Miss Lena Hart to stand with me. A fresh murmur moved through the crowd. Across the ballroom, Celeste had gone very still. Lena took the offered pages because there was no graceful way not to. Vivian angled the microphone slightly. Tell them what we discussed, she said under her breath. Lena looked out at the audience. At the donors, the trustees, the reporters, the socialites arranged like expensive punctuation. At Rowan, standing just beyond the first table, eyes fixed on her with unmistakable intensity. At the cameras, waiting. Then she breathed once and spoke. When people are asked to give, she said, voice steady despite the blood roaring in her ears, they are usually offered three things in return. Recognition, absolution, or the promise of measurable impact. Those things matter. But tonight is not only about generosity as transaction. It is about identity. The room quieted. Lena kept going. It is easy to write a check when the number changes nothing for you. It is harder to let that check mean something. Harder to admit that privilege becomes value only when it moves beyond comfort. The Halston Foundation does not exist to decorate conscience. It exists to interrupt indifference. Somewhere to the left, a camera shutter fired. She should have been terrified. Instead something older and truer took over, the part of her that had always known how language could turn a room if the room forgot to defend itself in time. Every person here knows what it is to inherit something, she said. Money. Opportunity. Influence. Education. Access. The question is not whether you have been given more than others. The question is what story that excess tells when the night is over. No one laughed now. No one shifted in their chairs. Even the waiters seemed to have stopped moving. Lena saw donors leaning in, board members forgetting to pose, the columnist lowering her pen because the moment had outgrown summary. This foundation asks children and families to trust a future they cannot yet afford. Tonight, I am asking the same of you. Not for applause. Not for optics. Not because generosity photographs well beneath crystal. But because legacy is not what your name rests on. It is what your name releases. The last sentence landed like a bell. Lena stopped. Vivian reached calmly for the microphone and said, which is why I kept her. The ballroom erupted. Applause first. Then louder applause. Then the unmistakable sound of a room deciding, collectively and at speed, that this was the moment worth belonging to. Vivian finished the final formal thank yous with lethal elegance, but the speech no longer belonged only to her. It belonged to the reveal. And the reveal had only started. Because the first donor to stand was not a board member. It was Rowan. He rose from his table, took the microphone from the stage host before anyone could stop him, and turned not to the guests but to Lena. The entire room noticed. Tonight, he said, you have all just heard the most honest words this foundation has had spoken for it in years. They were shaped by a woman some of you were prepared to misidentify, dismiss, or patronize before learning whether she had power you recognized. The applause stilled into attention. Lena's pulse became a physical thing. Rowan's voice stayed calm, but beneath it ran something fiercer. Let me spare the room further confusion. Lena Hart is not an ornament to this event. She is not a convenient assistant. She is not gossip for people with too much time and too little purpose. His gaze swept the crowd once, sharp enough to wound. She rewrote the speech that just moved you. She has kept this week from collapsing twice a day. And if anyone here has mistaken her for someone beneath respect, that error belongs to you, not to her. Across the room, Celeste looked as if the floor had shifted under her feet. Rowan turned fully toward Lena now. There is one more truth I should have said sooner. No one moved. Even Vivian had gone still. Rowan took one step closer to the stage. When I met Lena, I pretended to be her chauffeur because I wanted to know whether she would flinch before power. She didn't. Since then, she has told the truth to my face more consistently than anyone in this room, including me. I should have honored that sooner than I did. There it was. Not polished. Not strategic. Public. And irreversible. Lena could barely breathe. Then Celeste stood abruptly. Rowan, this is absurd. He did not even look at her. Sit down, Celeste. The authority in his voice cut through the room like glass. She did not sit. Worse for her, one of the communications assistants moved quietly to Vivian's side and whispered something in her ear. Vivian's expression turned almost gleeful. She took the microphone. Since we are all embracing honesty, perhaps I should add that the missing page was found in the wrong hands. Security. Two discreet men moved at once toward Celeste, who went white in the face beneath the ballroom lights. The room inhaled as one. Lena stared, understanding arriving in stages. The stolen page. The corridor smile. The rumor. Celeste opened her mouth, perhaps to deny it, perhaps to recover. It no longer mattered. No one was listening. Because Rowan was still looking only at Lena. And because, in front of everyone who had spent the evening deciding what she was worth, he said, quietly and clearly, you were never temporary to me. For a second after he said it, Lena could not move. The ballroom had become all brightness and silence and the strange suspension that follows a truth too large to fit neatly inside a room. Around them, donors whispered. Reporters sharpened. Security guided a furious, humiliated Celeste toward the side exit while Vivian accepted the unfolding drama with the satisfaction of a conductor hearing the exact chord she had intended. But Lena heard almost none of it. Only Rowan. You were never temporary to me. It should have been enough. It was not. Not because she did not want it to be. Because she had lived too long on promises offered beautifully and delivered badly. So she stepped down from the stage, crossed the small distance between them, and stopped close enough for the cameras to capture every fraction of her expression. The room waited. Lena looked straight at him. You do understand, she said, voice low but carrying in the hush, that saying the right thing in public does not erase saying the wrong thing in private. A lesser man might have flinched. Rowan did not. I know. Do you? Yes. His voice was steady, but there was no composure left in his eyes now. Only intention. I thought distance would protect you from this house, from gossip, from me making your life harder. What it did was insult your intelligence and leave you alone with conclusions you should never have had to draw by yourself. The honesty of that almost hurt more than the earlier mistake. Lena held his gaze. And what exactly are you offering now? Nothing temporary. The answer arrived without hesitation. Somewhere behind them, a donor laughed softly in disbelief. Someone else clapped once before realizing this was not yet that kind of moment. Vivian, magnificent in emeralds and judgment, said to no one in particular, if either of them wastes this scene, I shall disinherit someone. The room released nervous laughter. It helped. Barely. Rowan went on, every word still meant for Lena despite the audience hanging on each one. I am offering the truth, belatedly but without qualification. I want you here if you choose to stay. I want to fund your sister's treatment if you will let me do it in a way that does not wound your pride. I want to hire you for the work you are actually meant to be doing. And I want the chance to prove that what happened on that terrace was not a momentary failure of restraint. It was the first honest impulse I've trusted in years. There were gasps then. Real ones. Lena's eyes burned. Not because of the offer itself. Because he had understood the shape of her fear and spoken to it without turning it into charity. She swallowed once. You do realize this is the most inconvenient place possible to become sincere. A faint, shaken smile touched his mouth. I'm trying to grow. That did it. The laugh broke out of her before she could stop it, soft and incredulous and helplessly alive. The room answered with relieved applause. Vivian pressed one hand dramatically to her chest as if narrowly surviving other people's emotions. Lena looked at Rowan for one long moment more. Then she said, for the record, I'm not staying because your house is large. I assumed not. I'm not staying because you defended me in front of rich people who deserve the embarrassment. Also fair. And if you ever test me again by pretending to be someone you are not, I will leave you standing in your own driveway in the rain. This time his smile came fully, changing him with startling force. Understood. She took one step closer. Good. And kissed him. The ballroom exploded. Applause, laughter, shouted congratulations, the frantic staccato of cameras suddenly grateful for civilization's enduring commitment to spectacle. Someone near the back stood. Then more people stood. Vivian accepted all of it as if personally responsible for romance, philanthropy, and social correction in equal measure. When Lena drew back, Rowan's hand was at her waist, steady and warm and no longer careful about who saw it. Vivian reclaimed the microphone with predatory elegance. Now that we have corrected the emotional illiteracy in the room, I believe there were pledges to be made. And because the evening had become too vivid for anyone to retreat into pettiness, the money came fast. One donor doubled his planned gift. Another pledged matching funds. A third, visibly moved and perhaps slightly terrified of seeming less generous than the others, committed enough to fund an entire pediatric treatment initiative on the spot. The foundation director began crying discreetly into her champagne. The columnist who had asked whether Rowan would arrive alone was now writing so fast she nearly tore the page. Within 20 minutes, the gala had raised more money than any previous year in the foundation's history. Vivian gave Lena a look that said, I was right, as if this had all been a minor scheduling detail rather than an emotional detonation under crystal lighting. Later, much later, after the final major donors had left, after the orchestra had packed away their instruments, after the staff began clearing glasses and gathering abandoned wraps, Lena stepped out onto the front terrace for air. The night was cooler now, the gravel quiet, the fountain a distant murmur in the dark. Rowan found her there, as she knew he would. For a moment neither spoke. Then he held out her phone. You left this near the stage. She took it. Thank you. Mia called the house line while you were cornered by 3 trustees and an ex-minister with a rescue complex, he said. I had the hospital patched through to Dr. Kessler in private care. He reviewed her chart and wants to see her in the morning. No pressure. No obligation. But he's very good. Lena stared at him. You did that without asking. I did, he said. And if you hate it, I'll accept the verdict. But I did it because time matters. The exact phrase she had once used returned between them, transformed. Her throat tightened. Rowan. He stepped closer. I'm not asking you to owe me. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you decide what help looks like. There was the difference. Clean. Unforced. Real. Lena looked out across the dark lawn and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, that the future had shifted shape without warning and might not punish her for hoping. When she turned back, he was close enough now that she could see the fatigue in his face, the relief he was still trying not to show, and the quiet fear of a man who had said everything and could no longer retreat from it. So she spared him. Mia likes astronomy, terrible coffee, and correcting doctors, she said. If Dr. Kessler survives that combination, I'll consider him promising. A laugh escaped him, soft and stunned. That sounds almost optimistic. Don't get used to it. Too late. He touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers, gentle as if the truth between them had made gentleness possible. Behind them, through the open doors, Vivian's voice rang across the ballroom ordering someone not to let the auction orchids die before morning because sentiment was no excuse for neglect. Lena smiled. Rowan looked toward the sound and then back at her. You know she's going to treat this as a personal strategic victory for the rest of her life. She'll put it in her memoir. She doesn't need a memoir. She has witnesses. The laugh they shared then felt easier, cleaner, free of all the caution that had shadowed the days before. He offered his arm, absurdly formal under the circumstances. She looked at it, then at him. What is this? A refined attempt at walking you back inside without provoking another scandal before the flowers are removed. That sounds disappointingly sensible. I can revise. She took his arm anyway. Together they went back into the light of Halston Manor, not as employer and temporary staff, not as mistake and correction, but as two people who had finally stopped mistaking distance for safety. And when Vivian saw them re-enter side by side, she lifted her glass, victorious and serene, as if the whole night had unfolded exactly as planned. Maybe, Lena thought, for once it had.